tattoos were illegal in prison. I did a little Mexican lady with a sombrero, you know, a friend of mine. He actually did the outline with needle and thread. Bang, 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 bang.
Danny Trejo has one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. Scarred, tattooed, the kind of face that makes directors cast him as the villain without even asking him to audition. But there's a tattoo on his chest that tells a completely different story. It's a portrait of a woman wearing a sombrero, inked into his skin while he was sitting in one of America's most brutal prisons, years before he ever stepped foot on a movie set. And when he finally stood in front of Salma Hayek for the very first time and ripped his shirt off, her reaction was not what anyone expected. Not fear, not shock. Something far more human than that. What that tattoo actually represents, and what Hayek did when she saw it, is the part of this story that almost never gets told in full. The moment that made Hollywood stop and stare. Before we go back to where this tattoo came from, you need to know the moment it became famous. It's 1995. The film is Desperado. Director Robert Rodriguez is shooting one of the most stylish action movies of that decade, and the cast includes a 28-year-old Salma Hayek in only her second American film role. Danny Trejo has already been hired for a small part, the kind he'd been getting since 1985, a silent, menacing presence with no lines and maximum intimidation. He was exactly what Rodriguez needed. What Rodriguez didn't plan for was what happened when Trejo and Hayek met on set. Someone on the crew had already noticed something strange. The large tattoo on Trejo's chest, a woman's portrait in a cowboy hat, looked almost exactly like Salma Hayek. When Hayek walked over and someone pointed it out, Trejo did what Trejo does. He pulled his shirt open and told her he'd known her before he knew her, that he'd dreamed her before he ever met her. Hayek's reaction? She leaned in, looked closely, agreed it looked just like her, and then immediately pointed out that the body on the tattoo was slightly better than hers. That line got a laugh, but what happened right after the laughter died down is what nobody talks about. The crew on that set already had a complicated relationship with Trejo's presence. Production staff had quietly told Hayek before she met him that he was a former convicted armed robber who had spent years inside some of California's most dangerous prisons. Some people on set were visibly uncomfortable around him. The tattoo moment broke all of that tension in about 30 seconds flat. Keep that in your mind, because it matters more later than it does right now. The real story of that tattoo doesn't start in Hollywood. It starts in a prison cell in 1966, in the hands of a man nicknamed Super Jaw. How a prison artist tattooed destiny across 3 jails. Most tattoos take a few hours. This one took years and 3 different prisons to finish. The artist's name was Harry Ross, known inside the California prison system as Super Jaw. He started the outline of the portrait when Trejo was at San Quentin State Prison. Before he could finish, Trejo was transferred. Most tattoo artists would have left the work incomplete. Super Jaw followed him. He continued the piece at Folsom State Prison, one of the most feared correctional facilities in California. Before he could complete it there, Trejo was transferred again, this time to Soledad. Superjaw followed him a second time and finally finished the tattoo. A woman in a sombrero, a chara, a figure representing Mexican heritage and identity, now permanently across Danny Trejo's chest. At the bottom of the tattoo, Superjaw added a detail that most people never notice in photos. A strip of barbed wire running underneath the portrait. Trejo has said that barbed wire was meant to represent forever. He believed that when he got that tattoo, certain things in his life would be permanent. That belief would eventually be proven wrong in some ways, and shockingly right in others. What most people don't realize is that prison tattooing in the California state system during the 1960s was itself an act of defiance. Inmates used makeshift tools, sharpened staples, guitar strings, sewing needles, whatever they could get their hands on, powered by motors pulled from cheap electric fans. The ink was often made from burned materials, ash mixed with shampoo or whatever fluid was available. The fact that Superjaw produced a portrait detailed enough to be later compared to one of Hollywood's most beautiful women using handmade equipment inside a maximum security prison is its own remarkable footnote in this story. But here's what nobody asks. Why was Danny Trejo sitting in San Quentin in the first place? Because the answer to that question is what makes this tattoo mean something entirely different from what it looks like on the surface. The boy who learned everything from the wrong hero. Danny Trejo was born in 1944 in Echo Park, Los Angeles, into a Mexican-American family where toughness wasn't optional. His father, Dionisio, was a hard, cold man who had already fled Texas after stabbing someone and was not exactly built for warmth or patience. When his father wasn't around, young Danny moved in with his grandmother and her household of cousins and aunts. And that's where he met the person who would shape his entire life. Uncle Gilbert. Gilbert was only 6 years older than Danny, which made him feel more like a big brother than an uncle. He had the cars, the cash, the confidence. Everything a boy without a real father figure would automatically gravitate toward. Gilbert taught Danny how to box, which would later save his life in ways nobody could have predicted. But Gilbert also gave Danny his first hit of substance when Danny was just 8 years old, not by accident, deliberately. By 12, Danny caught Gilbert injecting substance. Instead of walking away, Danny demanded some too, using the logic of a 12-year-old with no guardrails. "Give me some or I'll tell." Gilbert obliged. Danny overdosed on his very first fix and woke up soaking wet in his grandmother's yard with no memory of how he got there. He was 12 years old. Within a year, Danny was in juvenile hall. He followed Gilbert into armed robberies to feed a growing addiction. He went through practically every juvenile detention center in California. By the time he turned 18, he had escalated from petty theft to robbing liquor stores with live grenades, drive-by shootings, and a bar fight where he stabbed someone in the face with a broken beer bottle. In 1961, during one brief stint in Los Angeles County Jail, he shared space with a scrawny, greasy young man named Charles Manson, who Trejo later described as someone who looked completely unremarkable but carried something unsettling about him. Trejo didn't think much of it at the time. He had bigger problems. His family had even tried sending him to relatives in San Antonio, Texas for one summer, hoping a change of scenery might straighten him out. One scorching Texas summer was all it took for Danny to beg to come back to California. The pull of the streets and the pull of Gilbert were stronger than any geography could fix. Trejo has written about this in his memoir, saying the problem was never the neighborhood. The problem was that crime felt like the only option that made sense, given everything he had been shown growing up. Gilbert was his North Star, and his North Star was pointing directly towards San Quentin, the prison that was designed to break all people. In 1965, Danny Trejo was arrested for selling 4 ounces of substance to an undercover federal agent. He has insisted to this day that it was actually sugar. It didn't matter. He was sentenced to 10 years and sent into a system that included Folsom, Soledad, and the one that everyone feared most: San Quentin. If you've never heard of San Quentin, understand this. When the prison transport bus pulled up to the gate and the door opened, the first thing inmates saw on top of the North Block was 2 lights. red, and green. If the red light was on, it meant someone was being executed inside at that exact moment. That was the welcome. That was the first impression. Trejo later said that seeing that red light told you everything you needed to know about where you had just arrived. People went in. Not everyone came back out. Trejo survived by fighting. His uncle's boxing lessons, something Gilbert gave him that was actually worth having, turned out to be the thing that kept him alive. He became the lightweight and welterweight boxing champion in every single prison he served time in. Not just San Quentin, every one of them. That reputation built a wall around him that even the most dangerous inmates respected. But boxing couldn't keep him out of everything. In 1968, a prison riot broke out on Cinco de Mayo at Soledad. In the chaos, Trejo was fighting other inmates and threw a rock. It hit a prison guard in the head. Trejo has said he was aiming at someone else. It didn't matter. He was thrown into solitary confinement and charged with attempted murder of a correctional officer. The potential sentence was death. He was 24 years old. What made San Quentin uniquely terrifying beyond even Folsom or Soledad was its culture of instant confrontation. Trejo has described how the moment a new inmate stepped off the bus, the yard tested them. Someone would walk up and challenge them, looking for any sign of weakness. If you didn't respond with immediate force, you became a target for everything that followed. Trejo understood this language before he arrived because Gilbert had prepared him for exactly this. In a deeply painful way, the uncle who destroyed his childhood also gave him the only tools that kept him breathing inside those walls. Now pause. This is the man with that tattoo on his chest. This is who was sitting in a cell when Superjaw was drawing a woman's face into his skin. Not a tough guy image, not a fashion statement. A man who genuinely did not know if he was going to live long enough to walk out of prison. That context changes the whole meaning of that portrait. Hold on to that, because we're not done yet. The deal he made in solitary confinement that changed everything. 3 months in solitary confinement at Soledad is a different kind of silence than most people will ever experience. No contact, no daylight, no noise. Just the weight of a potential death sentence and a head full of choices that led here. Trejo has spoken about what happened in that cell more times than he can count, because it's the moment that divides his entire life in half. He says he made a deal with God. Not a complicated prayer, not a long negotiation, just a simple, direct statement. If you let me die with dignity, I will say your name every day and do whatever I can for my fellow man. He never thought he was getting out. He was making peace. Then something remarkable happened. None of the roughly 3,000 inmates in that prison came forward to confirm the guard story. Without corroboration, the charges couldn't hold at the level needed for a capital case. Trejo walked out of solitary. He went back into the general population. And something inside him had actually shifted. He started attending a 12-step recovery program inside the prison, which he'd actually first stumbled into by accident years earlier at 15. This time, it stuck. He got clean inside one of the most violent prison systems in America. He was released on parole in August of 1969, the exact same month that Charles Manson, the man he'd shared a county jail with 8 years earlier, ordered the Sharon Tate murders. 2 men who walked the same corridors, completely different endings. After his release, Trejo went straight back to the neighborhood he had once terrorized. He took jobs as a gardener and a labor foreman, grinding out honest work while spending his evenings in recovery meetings. When his uncle Gilbert eventually showed up at his workplace, driving a brand new Lincoln, fresh out of prison himself, and already back in the game, offering Danny money and substances to come work for him again, Trejo turned him down. It was the first time in his life he had ever said no to Gilbert. He walked to the back of the workyard and sat alone. That moment, small and quiet, was the one that actually sealed everything that came after. Gilbert later ended up back in Folsom Prison in 1982, and the two drifted apart permanently. Trejo named his firstborn son Gilbert anyway. Some debts don't get erased just because the person who created them kept letting you down. Now, this is where the story gets genuinely strange. Trejo got out. He got sober. He stayed clean. And then, in 1984, a man he was sponsoring through a recovery program told him he was struggling on his job. The job happened to be on a movie set. Trejo went to the set to help someone else. What happened next wasn't planned by anyone. The accidental actor who became impossible to ignore. The film was called Runaway Train, a 1985 prison drama starring Jon Voight and Eric Roberts. Trejo showed up on that set as a drug counselor doing a favor for someone he was helping. He was not there to audition. He was not there to be discovered. But a screenwriter named Edward Bunker was also on that set. And Bunker was himself a former San Quentin inmate who recognized Trejo immediately. More importantly, Bunker remembered Trejo as the boxing champion of San Quentin. Eric Roberts needed someone to train him to box for the film. Trejo was standing right there. He started training Roberts, and the director, Andrei Konchalovsky, watched the two of them spar and thought Trejo's presence in front of a camera was impossible to ignore. He offered Trejo an on-screen role. Trejo was paid between $320 and $350 a day for that job. He has said he thought they made a mistake on his first paycheck. For the next several years, he worked consistently but without credit, playing a string of inmates, gang members, and menacing background figures. He was listed as bad guy or inmate number in film after film. He was fine with it. He wasn't building a career. He was staying clean, helping people in recovery, and working a job that paid more in 2 days than his father made in a month. The roles kept coming, small ones, in films like Death Wish 4, and then gradually larger ones. He appeared in Blood Out, a 1993 crime drama filmed partly on location at the actual San Quentin, where he was cast in a role and found himself walking back into the prison he had left as an inmate. He filmed scenes inside cell C550, his old cell. He has said the experience brought back memories he couldn't fully explain. The particular smell of the place, the sound the doors made, the weight of everything those walls had witnessed. It was one of the strangest professional experiences of his life, returning to the place that had almost ended him and performing fiction inside it. Then Robert Rodriguez came along, and everything changed again. Rodriguez was casting Desperado in 1995 and was specifically looking for a Hispanic actor who looked genuinely dangerous without having to act it. When Trejo walked into the room, Rodriguez reportedly said exactly that out loud. That casting also brought him onto the same set as a young actress named Salma Hayek, making her first major American film, and neither of them had any idea what was about to happen when they met. What Salma Hayek actually did, and why it mattered more than the tattoo. When Hayek first saw the tattoo and confirmed the resemblance, most people assumed that's the end of the story. The funny Hollywood coincidence, the icebreaker, the thing Danny Trejo tells on talk shows for a laugh. But it's not the end, because Hayek didn't just laugh it off and move on. A couple of months after filming wrapped, around Thanksgiving, she called Trejo and asked him if he had plans for the holiday. He said he was fine. She pushed. She asked him to come to her house for Thanksgiving dinner with her family. Not a Hollywood party, not an industry event, her family's Thanksgiving table. Trejo went, and he has said that he walked into her bathroom at some point during that dinner and almost started crying. Not because of the food or the occasion, because in his entire life, he had never experienced someone of Hayek's standing simply treat him like a person without an agenda, without fear, without the sideways glance that most people gave him when they learned who he was and where he'd been. Hayek didn't look at his tattoos and see a threat. She looked at him and saw something worth inviting home. That gesture is small by most people's standards. For Danny Trejo, who had grown up in a household where his father didn't even look up from the television when he came home from prison, it was enormous. He has called it one of the highlights of his life. Not the machete films, not working with Al Pacino and Robert De Niro in Heat, not becoming the most tattooed face in Hollywood. Eating turkey at Salma Hayek's family table because she thought to ask. The two went on to work together in 6 films, including From Dusk Till Dawn, Once Upon a Time in Mexico, the Spy Kids franchise, and Muppets Most Wanted. But none of those collaborations started with a contract. They started with a phone call and a holiday dinner. Trejo has gone on to build one of the most unlikely second acts in entertainment history. He opened Trejo's Tacos in Los Angeles in 2015, then Trejo's Coffee and Donuts, turning his name and his face into a brand that his younger self sitting in that Soledad cell would never have imagined possible. He still works part-time as a drug counselor, the same work he started doing in 1969 after parole. He speaks at juvenile halls and recovery centers across the country, and the neighborhood he once robbed from eventually put a mural of his face on a wall, not because of the movies, but because of what he gave back after them. The films in which he has appeared have grossed over $3.7 billion worldwide. He went from inmate number 1 to a man President Obama once stepped out of a receiving line to greet by name. And that's the truth behind that tattoo. If you enjoyed this unveil, smash that like button, comment, and subscribe for more untold Hollywood tales, and hit the bell so you never miss a drop. Want more? Check out another one of our videos. Thanks for watching.